These little art tools are one of the biggest reasons I find drawing so enjoyable. These are blending stumps, and I imagine most artists already know about them, but if you don't, they might just blow your mind. So for a quick bit of context, when I first started drawing, I didn't really blend my pencils. I just left it as it was and decided that was that. But somewhere down the line, I discovered you could blend graphite pencils with tissues, and from then on, tissues were one of my most used art tools. Folding them to a point for those tight fiddly areas, or making a wider, flatter surface to blend larger areas, using tissues helped to take my work to the next level and gave me those nice smooth blended gradients and tones. But as I got better and better, the details I was working on became smaller and smaller, and after a while, folding tissues to a point just wasn't cutting it anymore. Especially on my miniature drawings that were about to become much more of a priority for me. I needed something thinner and smaller to get into all those little nooks and crannies. That's when I finally decided to try out blending stumps. Thin pieces of paper rolled up incredibly tightly and made to form a stiff point you can use to blend. Blending stumps are the perfect art tool for all those fiddly and delicate areas and details where fingers and tissues would be too big and would smudge too much of the surrounding area. You can even make your own if you want, but I think it's difficult to make them as good as the ones you can buy. And although it's cheaper to make your own, in my experience the professional ones are also really affordable. But there's no reason you shouldn't give it a go. Either way, blending stumps are an incredibly simple art tool, but they're such a useful addition to your toolbox. They were immediately amazing. There was no learning curve, no time needed to get used to them. They made immediate improvements to my work and made it so much easier to get cleaner blends on much smaller areas. No longer was I smudging the entire eye just to blend a tiny bit of a pupil. No longer was I destroying highlights I worked hard on by trying to blend the super thin areas in between. Finally, I could blend and smudge with such fine, detailed precision. And they came in a bunch of different sizes, which was helpful. I should also say I only use these on drawings where I'm using black and white mediums like graphite or charcoal or carbon pencils. I personally don't use them for colour drawings. I used to use tissues for colour pencil blending, but I don't do that anymore either, because I think there are better ways to blend with colour pencils. So let's talk about blending stump maintenance. What do you do when they get unclean? With a tissue you can just fold to a different part of the tissue. But with blending stumps there's a few different things we can do. And no, I wouldn't recommend putting them in a pencil sharpener. Tried that, didn't work. So the simplest and easiest thing to do is to rub the graphite off on a scrap piece of paper. They won't look very clean by the end of it, but you can see the difference it makes here on the page. Another thing you can do is rub the end of the stump on an eraser. This is mostly the same as the previous tip, except in my experience this way makes the stump a little bit cleaner. But then eventually you have to rub the graphite off the eraser as well. But it's not too much of a hassle, works just fine. The third option, and probably the most common, is to rub the end of the stump against some sandpaper, grinding off the graphite, leaving a fresh, cleaner surface underneath. I've done this a few times, it works well, but remember to try and keep it angled properly so your blending stump stays pointy and doesn't blunt too much. It can take a bit of practice, but it's not too difficult to get the hang of. In my own personal experience, I find that none of these techniques get it perfectly clean. If you want them perfectly clean, I've seen some people use a craft knife to slice off the used parts, but I've never tried that. I find these three techniques get them clean enough to use them without damaging my tones though. So they're good enough for me. And an extra tip is to either have different blending stumps for different tones, or if your stumps are double-ended, you can do what I do and use the different ends for the different tones. I use this end for all the dark tones, and this end for the lighter tones. Even if you do this, you do still have to clean them sometimes, but I find you don't have to do it anywhere near as often. But wait, before you clean your blending stump, how about we try one more interesting little tip. One of my favourite things to do with a dirty blending stump is to use it to draw soft details. Without even having to use a pencil, we can use our stump to get these really delicate marks and lines, and in some cases fill entire little areas with an incredibly pale layer without any risk of pencil lines. I found that being able to achieve these soft details really helped add quality to my work. All of a sudden it was so much easier to add the type of important, subtle details where a lot of people don't really notice them, but would notice if they weren't there. So maybe give it a go and see what you can do. Now this isn't to say I don't still use tissues sometimes. As much as I love my stumps, I do find it difficult sometimes to consistently blend large flat areas like backgrounds with them. The smaller surface of the stump on the larger area of the page can cause streaks where I accidentally go over areas I've already blended. I imagine this is a technique issue more than anything else. I'm working on it. But in that situation, I tend to use a tissue, which doesn't always stop the problem, but it helps minimise it. But all in all, blending stumps are incredible. I love them. They're simple and easy to use, and they immediately helped me grow as an artist, improve my art quicker, and helped me have so much fun while doing it. They're one of the best art tools I own. And when it comes to drawing in black and white mediums, they're pretty much a necessity for me. I couldn't imagine being without them. So there we have it, the beauty, joy, and brilliance of blending stumps. What about the pencils that saved my love of drawing?